So you've just started uni, you've been to a few lectures, you've got your timetable sorted out, you're looking at it and you're thinking, there's loads of free space on there. What am I supposed to be doing with all this free time? Okay, let me talk you through it. Hello everyone, welcome back to The Attic. My name's Mark Jago. I'm a philosophy professor in the UK. I'm doing a series of videos aimed at answering questions from brand new students, trying to guide you through those first few weeks of your new university life. If that sounds good to you, you can do me a favour, give this video a thumbs up. That will help other students to find it on YouTube. And if you're liking it, why not subscribe to the channel and hit that bell icon to get notifications. Okay, so here's a pretty common phenomena for students, particularly art students, new at university. Okay, so you get there, you get your timetable sorted out, you start going to a few of the lectures, and you're kind of looking at, what you're meant to be doing in a week, and you realise, yeah, I've got kind of 1 or 2 lectures scheduled each day, and I've kind of gone to them and I listened to it, but what am I meant to do then? And I've got all this blank space in my timetable. What am I supposed to be doing in a week? I don't know, right? No one's told me. What am I meant to be doing? Oh, I'm going to start panicking. And then there are different ways that you can take that. So some students might kind of internalize it and blame themselves, like everyone else seems to know what they're doing, and maybe I was told what I'm supposed to be doing, but I've kind of messed things up and it's all my fault. Others might get really despondent, I've come here and this is all that's on offer, so I don't really need to do much, I don't really need to bother, and I'll just what's the point? And other people might get really angry, I've come here and I've paid my money, it's $9,000 a year in the UK, and this is all that's offered? Okay, so let me take you through some of those issues. I'm going to talk a little bit about what I think your uni probably wants you to do each week, and then I'm going to give you a bit of advice on how I would go about doing this. But first, just let me say that this kind of thing is much more of a problem for arts and humanities students than it is for science students. If you're studying science, your timetable is probably already looking pretty full. I've known engineering and chemistry students who are in lectures and classes and labs, maybe 30-something hours a week. So really, it's not really so much of an issue for them. For art students, on the other hand, you might have something like 10 to 12 hours scheduled each week, and the rest of it is just blank. So really, that's where the question of, what am I meant to be doing with all that extra time comes in. Okay, so let me start off by taking you through some numbers, and this is just a specific example from my university. We work on a credit system, so each class you do, each module you take is worth a certain number of credits. Typically in the first year, you'll do 6 modules at once, 6 in the first semester, 6 in the second, and each one is worth 10 credits. So you're studying 60 credits at any one time, and the expectation is that each credit should work out to about 10 hours of study. That's including going to lectures and all the stuff and your own study and revising and doing the exams. So that works out to 600 hours per semester. That's over 15 weeks. So a 40-hour week. Okay, great big caveat to say there. I don't think anyone ever does that right at the start of term, every week, all the way through. Some students never do that much stuff and still kind of do fine. You're going to kind of have different workloads at different points of the year. So as you're coming up to your midterm essays, you've still got all your lectures going on and you've got to write an essay. So that is going to be more work. At the end of term in the exam period, you probably won't have any lectures going on there, but you've got to revise for all your exams at once. So that is a big pile of work. So it ebbs and flows throughout the university year. I would kind of be really surprised if anyone started off trying to do, 40 hours of study a week, because then you got to ramp it up for the essays and the exams, and that, then you're risking burnout. Okay. So, on the one hand, I'm going to be telling you to take things easy at the start, but also I'm going to be giving you a bit of advice about how you can do study, what you should be doing beyond just the timetabled hours. Okay, so let's look at some suggestions for how you could fill 40 hours of study a week productively, bearing in mind that's a kind of an upper limit on what I think you should be doing. Okay, so I'm going to work on the basis of how we teach at my uni in philosophy. So you're going to be studying 6 modules at any one time. You're going to have 1 lecture a week for each of those. Each of those is probably going to be 1 hour long. And in addition to those 6 lectures, you're going to have maybe 6 seminars, 1 for each module. You might not have 1 seminar per module per week. They might be every other week. So you might only have 3 seminars in a week, but then you might have other stuff. There might be tutorial groups, personal tutor meetings. So on average, you probably have 12 hours timetabled per week. So I'm going to work on the basis that for each of those timetabled sessions, you should be doing some extra stuff, and then there should be some kind of general extra stuff that you should be doing. So let's start with the lectures. What should you be doing extra per lecture on your timetable? So basically, you can split this up into 3 stuff. There's stuff to do preparation for the lecture, there's stuff you should do immediately after the lecture, and then there's the big work of doing the reading or the study that was set in the lecture, or that's just generally kind of follow up from the lecture. Okay, so let's go through each one of those. What's the prep for the lecture? Well, typically you'll have a list of lecture topics for that module, so before the lecture you should, as a minimum, work out what the lecture's going to be about. And perhaps, you read what the lecture's about and it doesn't make much sense to you. It would be a really good idea if you just got a really basic understanding of what that topic's going to be. How can you do that? Well, just go on the web and look at like an encyclopedia, like a philosophy encyclopedia or an archaeology encyclopedia or whatever. Something that's just going to give you a really brief introduction to what that topic's about. Okay, right, so suppose you got your first lecture in philosophy of mind and it's about, Descartes' theory of substance dualism. So you might just go and look up, who was Descartes? What kind of time period are we talking about? What is substance dualism? What are the kind of issues there? Not going super deep, not looking at all the different arguments, but just kind of orientating yourself in the subject. That helps you hit the ground running in the lecture. Okay, so once the lecturer starts talking about this dude Descartes and kind of his theory of mind and his theory of substance dualism, you can kind of situate it within the bigger picture of all the stuff you're learning. That really helps you to get the most out of that 1 hour or 40-minute or whatever lecture period. Don't go crazy on this. 30 minutes tops. After the lecture, immediately after it, I think it's super helpful to do a bit of consolidation. So I think the old style way of doing lectures where you sit and listen and you kind of madly scribble down notes, that is not a good way of learning. Often the lecturer will give you notes. Some even say, I don't want you to make notes in the lecture. I want you to listen to what I'm saying and think about stuff and ask questions and talk to each other. Okay, so that's a good way of doing lectures, but it might mean that you don't come out of the lecture with any notes of your own. Maybe the lecturer gives you the notes that they've made up, but you probably want some things of your own. So what I'm suggesting is when you go out of the lecture, you go and grab a coffee, you grab your notepad, and you just jot down your thoughts. You jot down a few bullet points, like what were the salient points in that lecture? What were the kind of interesting questions that came up? Maybe something didn't sound quite right to you and you think, right, I need to work that out, okay? So you're not going to probably do it there and then, as in think through all the stuff, because other stuff will come up. So just make a note to yourself. This week, I want to think through that kind of issue about Descartes' theory of dualism, this kind of modal argument for the difference between the mind and the body, or whatever, okay? Just jot it down to yourself. Make clear, systematic notes so that in a week's time or in a few days' time, you can come back to it, look at it, and instantly see, okay, here's the thing I wanted to think about. If the lecturer suggests some reading to do, some homework assignments, or I think it would be really useful if you went and looked at this article, kind of jot that stuff down so it's super clear to you when you have the time to put into reading what it is you need to do. Again, don't go crazy on this. It's something like between 5 and 30 minutes straight after the lecture. The bigger task that you're going to take away from each specific lecture is going and doing a bit of reading. Now, your lecturer might have said, I want everyone to go away and read this, or it might be that you have a book that you're reading throughout the semester, so you're doing it kind of chapter by chapter each week. So you say, for this lecture, I'm going to read this bit or whatever. So whatever your lecturer has said, whatever your plans are for that semester, I think you should do a bit of reading for each module each week. And you might spend up to 2 hours on this a week. No more than that. You won't have time to do more than that because you're doing it for each lecture you're doing. Anything less than about 30 minutes, you're not really getting anything out of it. So between 30 minutes and 2 hours per lecture per week. So if you add all of that together, you're going to be doing 2 to 3 hours top-up work per lecture per week. So overall, with 6 lectures, that's going to be between 12 and 18 hours. So you can already see that fitting all of that in, if you're doing the kind of top end, the 18 hours, that's actually going to be kind of tricky to fit in on top of the 12 hours of lectures and seminars you've got. Okay, so I think that's kind of the most important thing that you should be doing each week. But there's also the seminars that you're going to have. Now, typically, seminars are more interactive bits of learning. The lecture is where the lecturer kind of tells you things, gives you the information. Seminars are typically much smaller groups. They're like discussion groups. You get to raise issues. Okay, so how are you going to do that? How are you going to get the most out of it? So here, preparation is more important than it was for the lecture. Because if you go into there and you haven't kind of got any kind of thoughts, you haven't got any kind of preparation, it's much harder to ask good questions and get something out of that hour. So I would recommend doing a bit of preparation for each seminar on top of the lecture stuff. So maybe you spend half an hour before each seminar kind of just going over what came up in the lecture. What are the kind of talking points that came up? Is there anything I want to ask about? This is important because you don't want to just let a conversation flow around you and you kind of hearing some points here and there. I mean, that's kind of useful, but it's much, much more useful if you think about what you want to get out of it. Like you go in thinking, okay, this issue of like Descartes and the mind and the brain, and there was that specific point that, I really want to talk to people about that. Okay, so you spend a few minutes before the seminar thinking about what is it you want to ask about? How can you ask that question in the clearest way? What are your kind of thoughts? What argument would you put together? If you do a little bit of that in advance, you will get a lot more out of those discussions. And then again, at the end of the seminar, there was this kind of big discussion. Maybe you were involved in it. Maybe you just sat and listened. That's kind of cool too. But you do want to consolidate a bit of that. What were the main points that came up? And what could you take from that? What could you go away and study to kind of add to your point of view, your side of the argument? It's also worth spending a bit of time after the seminar thinking about not what you said or what others said, but the way that you did it or the way that others did it. So if it's like a discussion-based seminar, they don't always go really well in terms of how the discussion is handled. Sometimes it gets a bit heated, or sometimes you don't really get your point across very well. Sometimes you just, you had this great idea, but you just couldn't express it in the right words. So spend a bit of time thinking, okay, if I was to do that again, how would I better express those thoughts? Or how would I kind of treat that discussion in a more, controlled and respectful way so that I can get into this debate without it becoming a heated argument? A little bit of time reflecting on that stuff will make the next seminar go a lot better. Okay, so you might spend around an hour, something like that, for each seminar you're doing. You might have 3 to 6 seminars per week. So you're looking between 3 and 6 hours on top of your scheduled class time, plus all the extra stuff you're doing for lectures. Okay, so this is kind of building up. What else should you be doing each week? Well, on top of your scheduled hours and the stuff you do for each lecture and the stuff you do for each seminar, you can think about some general reading around the subject. Okay, so maybe you've done a load of this before you start at uni, maybe you've done 0, kind of doesn't matter. Now's a good time to be doing some. Just general reading around the subject, trying to find out what most interests you. It's kind of useful for a whole bunch of reasons, right? Because you're going to have to be picking modules, classes to take next semester, next year. How do you know what kind of works for you, what interests you? Well, if you haven't done any reading, it's hard to know what you're going to like. You don't have to be doing reading that's relevant to your classes. I mean, you're going to be doing that anyway. So the whole point of setting aside some time for general reading around the subject, you might as well do some other stuff. It's also really important for kind of making you interested in the subject. Like, one of the things that I found from being a student myself, but also being a personal tutor to loads and loads of students over the years, is that the more that someone throws themselves into the subject, the more they like it. Okay? Even if it's a topic where they start off saying, I'm just not going to like this. This is really boring. They get into it. And some people say, I wish I'd got into this earlier. I wish I'd read that thing earlier. And then I would have really enjoyed it and done better right at the start of term. So just do a bit of reading and, you never know what you're going to find. Final thing that I think you should be doing every week, discussion, okay? General discussion, not necessarily targeted at a particular topic or a particular seminar, but just expanding your range of skills in discussion. For arts courses, particularly something like philosophy, but also like English and theology, it's really important to have these discussion skills. So, what are we looking at doing here? You're going to be learning a load of stuff in your lectures. Try explaining some of that stuff to your other course mates, okay? Kind of keep those discussions going. That's a really useful thing to do. Doing this kind of stuff outside the classroom setting, it's more relaxed. You're doing it down the pub. You kind of get your points across in a more relaxed way. It helps you develop as a student, as, an academic thinker. Also, try explaining the ideas you've got, the things you've been learning to people who aren't on your course, okay? So they won't have the theoretical background. They're kind of looking at, philosophy or history from a, scientist's eyes, let's say. Could you explain the thing that you're trying to explain to them where they don't have the language, the background? If you can explain a philosophical idea to a chemist, a physicist, or whatever, if you can do a really good job of that, then I guarantee that your essays will be better. Your philosophy or your theology or whatever essays will be clearer, they'll be better explained, they'll be better structured. Okay, so by having these discussions, you are improving your academic skills. So you might spend, an hour doing this each week, kind of couple of coffees with groups of friends, okay? So overall for the week, you've got your 12 scheduled hours. You've got 12 to 18 hours of extra stuff per lecture, 3 to 6 extra hours of stuff per seminar group, couple of hours of reading around the subject and maybe an hour of discussion. That would tot up to 40 hours if you did all of it, okay? So that's how you could fill 40 hours of study every week. Like I said, you're not going to do that every week. You shouldn't do that every week because some weeks you're going to have extra stuff to do, like writing those darn essays and revising for exams, all that kind of stuff. And look, I don't want to be freaking anybody out by giving the impression that you should be working like a full working 40-hour week every week, okay? You really shouldn't be doing that. The point is, you want to be thinking about doing most of this stuff, doing something from each of these categories most weeks. If you're not doing most of this stuff any week, you might have a problem, okay? If there's one thing here that you've never done, well, kind of give it a go and see if it helps. The most important bit of advice, however, I've got for university study is, sometimes stuff goes wrong. If it does, don't panic. Get in touch with your personal tutor. Tell them the kind of issues you've been having, I kind of want to do this study, but it's just not working out. Talk it through with them. Talk about how you can change things, what's going on in your life. They're basically there to help you. I'm going to be doing a whole bunch of other videos trying to answer questions like these, kind of dealing with problems that might come up through the university year. In the next video, I'm going to be looking at what happens if you miss stuff, if you miss classes. Okay, so I hope this one's been useful. If it has, if you've enjoyed it, give it a thumbs up. That helps other students to find it on YouTube. I'd appreciate it if you subscribe and hit the bell icon to get notifications. Thank you so much for watching this far, and I will see you back next time.